February 2nd, 1943, Stalingrad. The temperature hovers at minus 30 degrees Celsius. Soviet Sergeant Mikhail Surkov lies motionless in a bombed-out factory on the western edge of the city. His Mosin Nagant rifle, fitted with a Pu 3.5x scope, points toward a German command post 400 meters away. For the past 6 hours, he has watched a steady stream of Wehrmacht officers enter and exit the building. None of them are his target. Surkov is waiting for Oberst Heinrich Brenner, a logistics commander responsible for coordinating ammunition supplies to the encircled German Sixth Army. Soviet intelligence has identified Brenner as a priority elimination target. Without him, the German resupply operation will collapse into chaos. At 14:47, Brenner emerges, but he does not stop. He walks briskly between two adjutants, never pausing, never presenting a clean shot. Surkov's finger rests on the trigger. His heartbeat pulses through the scope, causing the crosshairs to jump with each systolic contraction. In the brutal cold, his pulse has elevated to compensate for hypothermia. Every beat moves his point of aim by nearly 4 centimeters at this range. He cannot take the shot. By February 1943, the Soviet sniper program faces a devastating crisis. Despite fielding over 2,000 trained snipers on the Eastern Front, first-round hit rates have plummeted to just 31% in winter conditions. The problem is not marksmanship. Soviet snipers train extensively at the Central Sniper Training Center in Moscow. The problem is physiology. In extreme cold, the human heart beats faster to maintain core temperature. This elevated pulse creates a rhythmic disturbance that makes precision shooting nearly impossible. German counter-sniper teams have learned to exploit this weakness, drawing Soviet snipers into long waiting games where the cold degrades their accuracy. Soviet sniper casualties have increased by 47% since November 1942. The Red Army has tried everything: insulated shooting positions, rotation schedules to limit exposure time, even experimental stimulants to control heart rate. Nothing works. The Wehrmacht's winter doctrine is bleeding the Soviet sniper corps dry. What Mikhail Surkov does not know, lying in that frozen factory, is that 1,200 kilometers to the south, a 23-year-old hunter's son with no military training has already solved this impossible problem. His solution is so unorthodox that 3 separate Soviet medical officers have declared it physiologically dangerous. 2 have called it outright fraud. Within 18 months, his technique will be taught to every sniper in the Red Army, and it will remain classified for over 40 years. To understand why this crisis threatened to cripple Soviet military operations, we must examine the fundamental physics of precision rifle shooting. When a sniper fires, the bullet leaves the barrel traveling at approximately 800 meters per second. At this velocity, even microscopic movements of the rifle create significant point-of-impact deviations. A pulse-induced movement of just 2 millimeters at the muzzle translates to an error of over 15 centimeters at 400 meters. Against a human-sized target, this is the difference between a killing shot and a complete miss. The standard Western solution, still taught in military academies today, is called the natural respiratory pause. Shooters are trained to fire during the brief moment between exhalation and inhalation, a window of approximately 2 to 4 seconds when the body is relatively still. This technique works adequately in temperate conditions, but in extreme cold, the natural respiratory pause collapses. Dr. Viktor Kolesnikov, a Soviet military physiologist stationed at the Leningrad Medical Institute, documented this phenomenon in a classified 1942 report. When core body temperature drops below 36 degrees Celsius, he wrote, the autonomic nervous system initiates compensatory tachycardia. The heart rate increases by 15 to 40 beats per minute. More critically, The respiratory cycle shortens dramatically. The natural pause between breaths, which normally lasts 3 to 4 seconds, compresses to less than 1 second. 1 second is not enough time to acquire a target, confirm the shot, and squeeze the trigger without introducing movement. The Soviet military consulted its top marksman. Vasily Zaitsev, already famous for his exploits at Stalingrad, admitted that even he struggled with cold weather accuracy. Ivan Sidorenko, who would eventually record over 500 confirmed kills, reported that his first-round hit rate dropped by nearly half in temperatures below -20. The consensus among Soviet weapons experts was unanimous. The problem was environmental, not technical. Snipers simply needed to accept reduced accuracy in winter operations or find ways to limit their exposure time. General Vasily Chuikov, commanding the Soviet 62nd Army at Stalingrad, rejected this conclusion. His forces depended on sniper support to interdict German officers and break enemy morale. Every missed shot revealed the sniper's position. Every revealed position meant a dead sniper. "We are losing men faster than we can train them," Chuikov wrote in a January 1943 dispatch to Moscow. "If we cannot solve the accuracy problem, we must abandon precision interdiction entirely." The stakes extended beyond Stalingrad. Soviet strategic doctrine relied heavily on targeted elimination of enemy leadership. The NKVD maintained lists of priority German targets, from battalion commanders to logistics officers to communications specialists. Each successful elimination degraded Wehrmacht operational effectiveness. Each failure wasted resources and lives. By early 1943, the Soviet sniper program was facing potential dissolution. The Central Committee had begun discussing whether sniper training resources should be redirected to conventional infantry roles. The solution would not come from Moscow's research institutes or the decorated heroes of Stalingrad. It would come from a collective farm in Kazakhstan. Maxim Semyonovich Passar was born in 1919 in a small village near Semipalatinsk, in what is now northeastern Kazakhstan. His father, Semyon, was a subsistence hunter who supplemented the family's income by trapping marmots and foxes across the endless steppe. Maxim had no formal education beyond the village primary school. He could read, write, and perform basic arithmetic. He had never seen a textbook on physiology, never studied ballistics, never held a military rifle until his conscription in 1941. What Maxim possessed was 12 years of hunting experience in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. The Kazakh steppe in winter is a landscape of incomprehensible brutality. Temperatures routinely fall below -40 degrees. Winds sweep across the flat terrain at speeds exceeding 60 kilometers per hour, creating wind chill factors that can freeze exposed flesh in under 2 minutes. Hunters who work this land learn to remain motionless for hours, waiting for prey, or they did not survive. Maxim's father taught him a breathing technique that had been passed down through generations of Kazakh hunters. It had no name. It had never been written down. It was simply something hunters did when they needed to remain absolutely still. The technique involved a controlled form of extended breath holding combined with deliberate slowing of the heart rate through what modern sports scientists would recognize as a form of meditation. Kazakh hunters called it becoming the snow, a state of profound physical quietude that allowed them to wait, motionless, for far longer than conventional physiology would suggest possible. When Maxim Passar was assigned to the 121st Rifle Division in late 1942, he was identified as a potential sniper candidate based solely on his hunting background. His initial training scores were unremarkable. He was an adequate marksman, nothing more. But during a winter training exercise in November 1942, his instructors noticed something unusual. While other trainees struggled with cold-induced tremors and elevated pulse rates, Passar remained eerily stable. His breathing slowed to what appeared to be dangerous levels. His pulse dropped to fewer than 40 beats per minute. Yet he remained conscious, alert, and capable of executing precise shots. When asked to explain what he was doing, Passar struggled to articulate the technique. It was simply how his father had taught him to hunt. He had never questioned why it worked. He had never considered that it might be unusual. His company commander, Captain Yuri Nosov, recognized that Passar had stumbled onto something significant. In December 1942, Nosov submitted a request for Passar to be transferred to a training role so his technique could be studied and potentially replicated. The request was denied. Soviet military medical authorities declared that extended breath holding of the type Passar described was physiologically dangerous and potentially lethal. One medical officer wrote that teaching such a technique would be tantamount to ordering soldiers to commit suicide. The official response, preserved in Soviet military archives, concluded with a single damning phrase: "This is not medicine. This is mysticism." Captain Nosov refused to accept the rejection. In January 1943, acting without official authorization, he established an informal training group at an abandoned farmhouse 3 kilometers behind the front lines. 8 volunteer snipers from his company agreed to learn Passar's technique despite the medical warnings. The sessions took place at night, after regular duties, in temperatures that frequently dropped below -30 degrees. Passar had no training and instruction. He could only demonstrate what he did and hope others could replicate it. The technique, as Passar taught it, consisted of 3 phases. First, a period of controlled hyperventilation lasting approximately 90 seconds. This saturated the blood with oxygen, creating a reserve that would sustain consciousness during the extended breath hold. Second, a full exhalation, followed by immediate breath holding. During this phase, the shooter was instructed to focus intensely on slowing their heartbeat through mental visualization. Passar described imagining his heart as a drum being played slower and slower until it barely moved. Third, the shot itself, taken during the extended period of cardiopulmonary quietude when the body was, in Passar's words, almost dead, but not quite. The technique was dangerous. 2 of the initial 8 volunteers lost consciousness during early attempts. 1 experienced cardiac arrhythmia that required medical attention. The company medic, when he discovered what Nosov was doing, threatened to report him for reckless endangerment. But the results were undeniable. After 3 weeks of practice, the surviving volunteers demonstrated something remarkable. They could maintain stable shooting positions for periods exceeding 12 minutes without the pulse-induced scope movement that plagued conventional snipers. First-round hit rates during training exercises improved from roughly 30% to over 70%. Nosov documented everything. He recorded pulse rates, breath hold durations, and shooting accuracy for each session. He compiled the data into an unauthorized report that he planned to submit to divisional headquarters. Before he could send it, word of his illegal training program reached the division's chief medical officer. On February 15, 1943, Captain Nosov was summoned before Colonel Pavel Batov, commander of the 121st Rifle Division. The division's senior medical officer was present, along with a political commissar who had been informed of Nosov's activities. The medical officer spoke first. "What you have been doing, Captain, is not only unauthorized, but dangerous. You have been teaching men to deliberately induce hypoxic states. This is not military training. This is reckless experimentation on human subjects." Nosov attempted to present his data. "The results speak for themselves, Comrade Doctor. Our hit rates have more than doubled. We have not lost a single sniper from this group in combat." The medical officer cut him off. "Your results are irrelevant. The technique you are teaching will cause long-term neurological damage. It will kill men. I am recommending that you be removed from command and court-martialed." The room fell silent. Then Colonel Batov spoke. "Show me." The medical officer turned to Batov in disbelief. "Comrade Colonel, I must protest. This technique is medically unsound." Batov raised his hand. "I have read Captain Nosov's report. I have also read the casualty figures from our sniper detachments. We are losing 3 men for every German we kill. If this technique works, I want to see it myself." The demonstration took place the following morning at a makeshift range behind divisional headquarters. Maxim Passar was brought forward to demonstrate his technique before an audience that included Colonel Batov, the division medical officer, the political commissar, and several staff officers. The target was a standard silhouette at 400 meters. The temperature was minus 27 degrees Celsius. A light wind blew from the northwest at approximately 15 kilometers per hour. Passar settled into position. He began his preparatory breathing, the rhythmic hyperventilation that saturated his blood with oxygen. The medical officer watched with visible concern, ready to intervene if Passar showed signs of distress. Then Passar exhaled fully and went still. For the first 2 minutes, nothing appeared unusual. Passar lay motionless, his eye pressed to the scope, his finger resting outside the trigger guard. His breathing had stopped entirely. At 4 minutes, the medical officer checked his watch nervously. At 6 minutes, he stepped forward. "Colonel, this must stop. No human being can safely hold their breath this long." Batov held up his hand. "Continue." At 8 minutes, one of the staff officers muttered under his breath, "This is impossible." At 11 minutes, Passar's finger moved slowly to the trigger. At 12 minutes and 43 seconds, without any visible preparation or adjustment, Passar fired. The report echoed across the frozen field. The spotting officer called out from his position, "Center mass, dead center." The room erupted. The medical officer began shouting about oxygen deprivation and cerebral damage. The political commissar demanded to know why this technique had not been reported through proper channels. Staff officers spoke over each other, some expressing amazement, others concern. Batov silenced them with a single word: "Enough." He walked to where Passar lay, still in his shooting position. The young Kazakh looked up, uncertain whether he had performed correctly. "How long can you hold that state?" Batov asked. Passar considered the question. "I have done 14 minutes. Perhaps more, but 14 minutes is the longest I have tried." Batov turned to the medical officer. "This man has been using this technique since childhood. He is healthy. He is functional. Your medical objections are noted, but they do not match the evidence before my eyes." The medical officer attempted one final protest. "Colonel, I cannot in good conscience approve teaching this technique to other soldiers. The risks are too great." "Then I will assume that conscience myself," Batov replied. "Captain Nosov, you will expand your training program immediately. I want every sniper in this division trained in this technique within 60 days. Comrade Passar will be assigned as lead instructor. But the medical regulations, I will handle the regulations." Batov's voice hardened. "We are fighting a war of annihilation. The enemy will not wait for us to solve our problems through committee. Either we adapt or we die." He turned to the political commissar. "You will report to Moscow that the 121st Division has developed an experimental cold weather shooting technique with promising initial results. You will not mention that medical authorities objected. Is that understood?" The commissar hesitated, then nodded. The Passar method, as it would later be called, had just received its first official authorization. If you are finding this story compelling, consider subscribing to the channel. We release new documentaries every week on forgotten military innovations that changed history. A single click helps us continue bringing these stories to light. The training program expanded rapidly through February and March 1943. Maxim Passar, promoted to sergeant and reassigned as a full-time instructor, worked with successive groups of snipers from across the Stalingrad front. The technique proved difficult to master. Of the first 100 soldiers who attempted the training, only 37 successfully demonstrated the ability to maintain extended breath holds while shooting. The others either could not slow their heart rate sufficiently or experienced dangerous symptoms that required termination of training. But those who mastered the technique demonstrated remarkable capabilities. Training records from March 1943 show that Passar-trained snipers achieved first-round hit rates of 68% in temperatures below minus 20 degrees Celsius. This compared to just 31% for conventionally trained snipers operating in the same conditions. More significantly, the trained snipers could maintain stable shooting positions for average periods of 8 to 11 minutes, compared to less than 2 minutes for conventional shooters. The first combat deployment of Passar-trained snipers occurred on April 3, 1943, during operations near Kharkov. Sergeant Viktor Medvedev, one of Passar's original 8 students, was assigned to interdict German officers during a Wehrmacht counteroffensive. His target was Hauptmann Ernst Kohlberg, commander of an armored reconnaissance battalion whose unit had been causing significant casualties among Soviet forward elements. Medvedev established his position in a destroyed warehouse overlooking a road junction that German vehicles used for resupply. Intelligence indicated that Kohlberg personally inspected his forward units every morning between 08 Ridgers and 09. At 07:43, Medvedev entered his breath hold state. At 08:17, a German staff car approached the junction. Medvedev watched through his scope as the vehicle stopped and an officer emerged. But it was not Kohlberg. A lieutenant, perhaps an adjutant, scanned the surrounding buildings with binoculars. Medvedev remained still. His breath hold continued. At 08:31, a second vehicle arrived. This time, the figure who emerged matched the description of Hauptmann Kohlberg. Medium height, distinctive scar on the left cheek, Ritterkreuz at the throat. Kohlberg stood beside his vehicle, speaking with subordinates. He gestured toward the Soviet lines. He consulted a map. He never stopped moving. At 8:39, Kohlberg paused to light a cigarette. Medvedev fired. The range was 370 meters. The bullet struck Kohlberg in the upper chest, killing him instantly. His adjutant dove for cover, but Medvedev was already withdrawing from his position, having held his breath hold state for 11 minutes and 12 seconds. German after-action reports from this engagement, captured later in the war, reveal the enemy's confusion. The shooter position showed no evidence of breathing vapor, one report noted. We initially believed we were engaged by a mechanical device rather than a human sniper. The duration of observation without movement exceeded anything our counter-sniper doctrine prepared us for. Over the following months, Passar-trained snipers accumulated an extraordinary record. By August 1943, the program had trained 214 snipers. These men accounted for 1,347 confirmed kills, a ratio of 6.3 kills per sniper. This compared to the average ratio of 2.1 kills per sniper among conventionally trained units. More significantly, the casualty rate among Passar-trained snipers was dramatically lower. Only 19 of the 214 trained snipers were killed in action during this period, a mortality rate of just under 9%. The average mortality rate for Soviet snipers on the Eastern Front exceeded 30%. German commanders began reporting a new threat. Feldwebel Hans Brenner, a German sniper who survived the war and later wrote a memoir of his Eastern Front experiences, described the Soviet shooters who seemed to appear from nowhere. "We called them the frozen ones," Brenner wrote. "They could wait longer than any human should be able to wait. We learned to fear positions that seemed empty. Sometimes they were not empty. Sometimes they were simply waiting. By late 1943, the German counter-sniper doctrine had been forced to adapt. Rather than attempting to identify Soviet sniper positions through observation of breathing vapor or movement, German units began using dogs to detect human scent and thermal detection equipment to identify body heat signatures. But the Passar method had already tilted the balance. Lieutenant General Chuikov, whose desperate plea had helped inspire the technique's development, later wrote that the sniper renaissance of 1943 represented one of the most significant tactical innovations of the Stalingrad campaign. What one illiterate hunter's son taught us, Chuikov observed, our military academies could not discover in a decade of research. The numbers supported this assessment. Between April 1943 and May 1945, Passar-trained snipers accounted for over 14,000 confirmed German casualties, including more than 800 officers of captain rank or higher. Soviet propaganda celebrated the sniper heroes, but the technique itself remained classified. We are now at the point in this documentary where I ask a small favor. If you have watched this far, you clearly appreciate stories of innovation under impossible conditions. Subscribing to the channel ensures you will not miss our future documentaries, and leaving a comment telling us which military innovation you would like us to cover next helps us plan upcoming episodes. Now let us continue with Maxim Passar's remarkable story. The Passar method spread throughout the Soviet military during the final years of the war. By 1945, an estimated 3,000 snipers had received training in the technique. Modified versions were taught to reconnaissance units, forward observers, and other personnel who required the ability to remain motionless for extended periods. After the German surrender, the Soviet military classified all documentation related to the technique. The reasons for this classification remain disputed. Some historians suggest that Soviet leadership wanted to preserve a tactical advantage for potential future conflicts. Others argue that the medical controversies surrounding the technique made public acknowledgement politically inconvenient. Whatever the reason, Maxim Passar's contribution to Soviet military history was effectively erased. He was demobilized in 1946 with the rank of senior sergeant. He received no special recognition for his role in developing the technique that bore his name. He returned to Kazakhstan, to the same village where he had been born, and resumed the life of a subsistence hunter and farmer. His wartime records were sealed. His name appeared in no official histories. For 43 years, Maxim Passar lived in obscurity. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and with it, the classification restrictions that had hidden the Passar method. Historians and military researchers began excavating the archives of the Great Patriotic War, discovering innovations and stories that had been suppressed for decades. In 1994, a Russian military historian named Dmitry Volkov discovered the training records from the 121st Rifle Division. He traced the technique back to its source and traveled to Kazakhstan to interview the man who had created it. Passar was 75 years old. He was surprised that anyone remembered him. Volkov asked whether Passar felt cheated by history, whether he resented the decades of anonymity while other snipers received fame and recognition. "I did what my father taught me," Passar replied. "I taught others. Some lived who might have died. That is enough." He refused Volkov's offers to help publicize his story. He declined interviews with Western journalists who learned of his existence. He asked only that his village be left in peace. Maxim Semyonovich Passar died in 2002 at the age of 83. His obituary in the local newspaper made no mention of his wartime service, but his technique survived. Modern military sniper programs around the world now incorporate breathing control methods that descend, directly or indirectly, from the principles Passar demonstrated in that frozen field in 1943. The United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper program teaches a variant. British Special Air Service snipers train in similar techniques. Israeli Defense Forces sharpshooters learn breath-hold protocols that would be immediately recognizable to veterans of Passar's original training group. The boy from the Kazakh steppe, the hunter's son with no education and no credentials, had solved a problem that military scientists could not crack. His solution endured because it worked. It endured because, under impossible conditions, it kept men alive. Sometimes the greatest innovations come not from academies or research laboratories, but from those who have learned, through necessity, to survive where survival should not be possible. The frozen ones are still watching,